Gon freaks. At first glance, he appears to be a boy raised in the great outdoors, a beacon of innocent, unadulterated light. However, when one dissects his true nature, a bottomless void and a madness incomprehensible to the ordinary mind lie dormant beneath the surface. He is not simply a boy with a strong sense of justice. His behavioral principles are decisively misaligned with the ethics, fear, and survival instincts that biologically define us. This is a record of how a single boy, due to his overwhelming purity, stepped across the line that separates humanity from monsters. Chapter 1: The Missing Function of Fear. Anomalies in Early Behavior. Reflex without thought when observing the individual known as Gon freaks. The most baffling trait is his lack of biological survival instinct. The functions of fear and risk avoidance, which most humans acquire during development, seem either congenitally absent in him or paralyzed by some unknown factor. This anomaly was already complete the moment he left his home to become a hunter. The first sign of this dissonance occurred on the ship heading to the Hunter-Hunter exam. In the midst of a violent storm, a crew member lost his balance and was thrown toward the raging sea. An ordinary human would freeze, or at least take a split second to think of a way to save him. Gon, however, leapt off the ship without a single moment of cognitive processing. The specific peculiarity of this action was that he jumped with absolutely no plan for his own survival. He avoided falling into the ocean only because Kurapika and Leorio happened to catch his legs at the last second. Gon casually remarked, "I knew you two would catch me, but this is too short-sighted to be dismissed as mere trust." He entrusted his lifeline to strangers he had met only hours prior, never even imagining the outcome where he might die. This is not courage, it is a lack of imagination regarding death. To him, death is not a worst-case scenario to be avoided, but merely one of many equal possibilities. Indifference to pain that terrified a torturer, this psychological defect was exposed in a clearer, more brutal form during the final phase of the Hunter-Hunter exam, in his confrontation with Hanzo. Against Hanzo, a professional trained in assassination and torture, Gon was unilaterally beaten. His joints were dislocated, his arm broken, and he was subjected to hours of assault, yet he continued to stand. What must be noted here is the erratic nature of Gon's response. When threatened that his legs would be cut off, he merely looked troubled and said, "I don't want my legs cut off," but showed no trembling fear, nor did he consider surrendering. Typically, torture is an act that forces the victim to weigh pain against the fear of permanent loss to break their spirit. But for Gon, that scale does not exist. Losing his legs versus surrendering. In his mind, the latter was overwhelmingly more unacceptable. Hanzo eventually uttered the words, "I give up." He did not yield to Gon's strength, he yielded to the terror of Gon's bottomlessness. Killing him is easy, but making him submit is impossible. Faced with a human whose spirit could not be broken by pain, the one who felt a normal, healthy fear was Hanzo, the torturer. He likely saw a void in the depths of Gon's eyes, a place where neither logic nor emotion could reach. Chapter 2: The Absence of Good and Evil. White Madness. The danger that made an appraiser shudder in human society. Good and evil are the most basic compasses guiding our actions. However, in Gon's mental structure, that compass is either fundamentally missing or reacting to a magnetic field entirely different from our own. He is by no means a saint. What drives him is not morality, but a bottomless curiosity. This spirit, too pure for its own good, swallows and praises everything equally, whether good or evil, as long as it sparks his interest. There is a man who most accurately verbalized this mental anomaly, Zepile, the antique appraiser he met in York New City. Observing Gon, who showed no disgust toward assassination techniques or fraudulent counterfeiting skills but rather was genuinely impressed by their high caliber, Zepile felt a chill run down his spine. He doesn't care about good or evil. If he thinks something is amazing, he opens his heart to it without distinguishing right from wrong. In other words, he is dangerous. Usually, humans simultaneously hold the emotion of amazing and the reason of this is wrong, applying a mental break. Gon has no such break. To him, the only thing that matters is not is this socially or morally correct, but is this interesting to me? This receptivity, like a blank white canvas, harbors the danger that he could just as easily respect a heinous criminal as a teacher and absorb their ways. Gratitude to a murderer. That fear became reality during his encounter with Binold in Greed Island. Binold was a wanted criminal with a grotesque preference for killing humans and eating their flesh. Yet, after using him as a training partner, Gon did the unthinkable. He bowed deeply to this cannibal and, with a beaming smile, said, "Thank you." He did not thank Binold because the criminal had repented or paid for his sins. He thanked him purely because he was useful in making me stronger. No matter how evil the opponent, or how many lives they had taken in the past, if they provided a benefit to his current self, Gon accepted them with innocence. This is not benevolence, it is an extremely cold, self-serving utilitarianism. The double standard of sympathy and bloodlust. On the other hand, he directed intense hatred toward the Phantom Troop. But if one observes the flashpoint of his rage closely, his distorted values become visible here as well. He did not fly into a rage simply because the troop massacred people. His anger exploded the moment he saw troop members shedding tears for their fallen comrade. They can cry for their friends, so why can they remain indifferent to the pain of others? What Gon could not forgive was not the murder itself, but the contradiction within them. I could understand if they were heartless monsters. But I don't like that they have hearts and choose to use them selectively. This is less about a sense of justice and more akin to a child throwing a tantrum because puzzle pieces don't fit, a pure desire for logical consistency. He lacks antibodies against malice. He does not recognize poison as poison, he processes it as an object of interest or a contradiction to be eliminated. That innocent greed is his greatest madness. Chapter 3, Pure Aggression. The day the monster was born. Proving madness over victory. I won't forgive anyone who hurts my friends. This high purity anger, once it exceeds capacity, becomes a deadly toxin that dissolves enemies, allies, and even his own humanity. The moment this misalignment became decisive was the final battle against the bomber, Jinthru, in Greed Island. Originally, there was a perfect scenario prepared for this battle. However, at the last moment, Gon abandoned the safe strategy. The reason was not tactical necessity, but an extremely personal, childish selfishness. I want to crush his pride, and I want to test my own idea. He intentionally left his left arm defenseless and took Jinthru's explosive ability, Little Flower, head on. As flesh burst open and bones shattered, an ordinary human would crumble from the agony. But Gon showed no concern for his lost limb. Instead, he wore the smile of a beast cornering its prey. I had to do this. To trick you. The moment he heard those words, Jinthru, a cold-blooded mass murderer, backed away in terror. This guy. He's insane. To Gon, the loss of his own limbs was a trivial price to pay to satisfy his pride and impulse. It was proof that he had already deviated from the framework of human survival instincts. When a hero becomes a blackmailer, then came the Chimera and extermination mission. Here, Gon's madness crossed the critical point. To restore his mentor, Kite. For that single purpose, he lightly stepped over the line of ethics. In a room within the palace, he confronted Neferpitou, who was defenseless and desperately healing a wounded girl, Kamugi. The Gon of the past would never have used a weak, innocent girl as a shield. But this version of him was different. If you say one more word, I'll kill her. There was no bluff or negotiation tactics in those words. If Pitou had made the slightest suspicious move, he would have crushed the skull of that innocent blind girl without hesitation. In the face of his goal to save Kite, the life of a stranger was no more than a pebble on the road. On that day, the person wearing the face of the most ruthless villain in the palace was undeniably Gon himself. Severing ties with his best friend, madness eventually bears its fangs at those closest to it. When his best friend, Killua, desperately tried to pull him back from being swallowed by hatred, Gon spat out cold words. You have it easy, Killua. You're perfectly calm. Since it has nothing to do with you. To the partner who had survived countless brushes with death alongside him, who supported him more than anyone else, he declared, you are an outsider. It was a consciousness of privilege. I am the victim, I am hurt the most, therefore I am forgiven for whatever I do. With his vision narrowed, he completely lacked the imagination to consider the feelings of others, not even realizing he was gouging out his friend's heart. That solitary rampage carried him to the depths of a darkness where even Killua's hand could no longer reach. The transformation named ruin, and then came the definitive despair, the revelation of Kite's death. At that moment, something inside Gon snapped completely, with an audible sound. I don't care. If this is the end. That wish was not a beautiful act of self-sacrifice, but a despair toward the world and a destructive impulse toward himself. Abandoning his future potential, accepting that he would never use Nen again, a restriction and pledge far too heavy for a human soul. He threw his own life onto the fire's kindling and underwent a forced, grotesque growth in the blink of an eye. It was a form that had discarded a human future in exchange for overwhelming power. He continued to swing his fist down upon Pitou, who had already lost the will to fight, even after her face was smashed beyond recognition. Even after the opponent was dead, he continued to beat the corpse. That figure was a sorrowful avenger, but at the same time, it was a tragedy too painful to watch, a monster named emotion rampaging in the borrowed body of a boy. Conclusion. Gon Freaks did not turn evil. He was simply too honest with his own emotions. I want to save. I can't forgive. I want to break. This is the fate of a child who obtained immense power without the rationality to inhibit those impulses. What he demonstrated to us is the fact that purity can sometimes invite a conclusion more cruel and hopeless than any malice. What he lost that day was not just his Nen ability, but the very innocent heart of a boy.